Configuring fault tolerance in vSphere 6. Wow, this is cool. We know what high availability can do it for us, and in one of my previous video we have configured HA, high availability, and tested, and it was all good, right? However, the problem with HA or high availability is that it requires restart. What if I want to have a mechanism that I don't want to my virtual machine to even restart, and it should be available as a matter of seconds, without going down, always availability. For that reason, we have something called FT or fault tolerance. Well, then why it's not that popular? Well, it started getting popular because in previous versions, like version 4 and 5, FT was there, fault tolerance was there. However, it was limited to just one virtual CPU. And to be honest, in production environment, what kind of critical VM I will have with one virtual CPU, right? However, in version 6 now we have FT, which I can protect VMs which are using up to 4 virtual CPUs, and that makes sense. I have many virtual machines running with 4 virtual CPUs, and you will have also, and those are critical ones, and you can be protected with FT. Now it makes much more sense. Typical example could be vCenter itself. In a small to medium sized environment, you can have vCenter with up to 4 vCPUs, and let's say you are running vCenter virtual on top of your ESXi servers on vSphere infrastructure, and you can protect your vCenter using FT. Alright, so it's all good. FT creates, when you configure FT, what it does basically, it creates another instance called, in FT term, it's called secondary instance of that VM, which is sort of a read-only. So you have one primary virtual machine and a secondary or shadow virtual machine running on 2 different hosts. So in case if the host which is primary VM running got compromised or failed, the secondary VM will automatically take over, and it will become primary. And then once the secondary will become primary, FT will regenerate regenerate another VM that can protect that primary VM. It's might not making sense what I'm explaining to you, but it will make much more sense when we will test it. And I want to show you a quick comparison for FT here. There are features, virtual CPUs before 5.5, 1 CPU, version 6.4, memory 64 gig. Virtual disk type, in previous version it was just supported thick disk. It was supported for thick disk only, but here you can have a thick disk, thin disk, and others. Backup type, now it's possible to take snapshots. Before it wasn't. And another major difference is the storage redundancy. What I mean by storage redundancy is this. You see here. In previous version, the shadow or secondary VM will be created, right, on another host. It will use this different CPU and memory and network. However, primary and secondary will use the same VMDK file. So we don't have a storage redundancy. In vSphere 6, when you configure FT, let's say I configure FT for VM1, which resides on LUN 1. When I configure FT, it will create VM2 and it will copy the VMDK files from LUN1, let's say, to LUN2. So I will have two different copies. Secondary will run from a VMDK which is on LUN2, and primary, of course, is running from VMDK files which is on LUN1. So even if I use a LUN, let's say LUN1, then secondary, which is using LUN2, will become primary, and then I don't lose a thing, and no restart, nothing. It will always be running. And para virtual devices supported now, HA supported, DRS supported, site recovery manager supported. DRS is partially supported for initial placement, but not after that. One more thing, that if you configure virtual machine for FT, you will not be able to use storage vMotion. You will be able to use a storage vMotion for that virtual machine once you disable FT. And here's the one of the major requirements for FT. It requires 10 gig connection because changes needs to be synced up. I mean, whatever the user inputs or sessions are, it needs to be written on two places. And the FT logging requires a very high speed interface. 10 gig is recommended. 1 gig you can test on 1 gig, it will work, but it will give you a warning. Like in my environment, I have 1 gig and I will show you that. It will work, but it will be kind of a little slow. Another reason of slowness in my lab environment is the SAN, because my ESXi hosts are accessing SAN using 1 gig connection. But in production environment it will be much more faster. So alright, let's see how to do or configure FT. Now to configure FT, what we need to do first. To configure FT, just give me a second, let me just interrupt this one. Okay. Now to configure FT, what we need to do. First, we need to configure VM kernel network. We need to enable a VM kernel network for FT logging. And for that, in production environment, you may have a different VM kernel network with different card, or even if you have, let's say, just two cards and 10 gig each, you may have a different port group, VM kernel port group for FT logging with different IP scheme or a different VLAN. In my case, I don't have VLAN, so I'm using the same IP addresses, and I'm using, like high availability or load balancing based on my 1 gig NICs. So what I will do, I will use the existing network and I will enable FT logging on my existing network. And how would I do that? I will go to one of my hosts, and manage, related objects, distributed switches, and here add manage host networking, select the hosts, all hosts. I can configure, of course, template mode. I have showed you earlier. I can configure that, but template mode. But I have just 3 servers, so I will just enable it real quick. And what I want to do, I want to manage my VM kernel adapters. And in VM kernel adapter, which is my VM key 0, which is on distributed switch, I will edit it and I will enable FT logging in this. Same thing I will do for ESXi2, edit adapter and enable FT logging, and same thing for ESXi3, edit adapter and FT logging. All good. So I enabled FT logging on my existing network. You can of course create a different one. and no impact for my iSCSI. And so this is first thing. We need to configure FT logging. And after that, we need to choose a VM for which I want to configure FT or fault tolerance. Let's select server 2. Server 2. Okay. If I go to, let me just show you here. If I go to my LANs, as you know, remember we configure data store clustering, and I select iSCSI DS1, I see server 2 here. So and DS2, I don't have server 2 here. It means server 2 VMDK files is on DS1. Okay. Why it's important? I will tell you. So let's configure FT or fault tolerance for server 2. So I will right click server 2, fault tolerance, and say turn on fault tolerance. And it will give me a warning because, you know, I don't have sufficient bandwidth for FT logging. And it's a warning, right? Keep this in mind. I'm enabling this for server 2, and server 2 is running on ESXi1. Okay. No worries. Where I would like to keep VMDK configuration file and the tiebreaker file for server 2. Remember, for FT in vSphere 6, it creates a copy of VMDK configuration files, right? VMDK file and configuration file, as well as the tiebreaker that, you know, breaks the tie between the primary and secondary. So I need to select a data store, and if I click browse, you see I cannot select storage DRS, data store cluster. I have to choose individual. So if I will select data store 2 because data store 1 have already VMDK file for server 2, and in order to have storage or LUN level high availability or storage level redundancy, I would like to choose a different data store. So data store 2, same thing I will do for data store 2. Okay, compatibility check succeeded. Next, and select host for secondary VM. Server 2 right now running on ESXi1, so secondary VM or shadow VM I would like to run on ESXi2. And again, it gives me a warning that about the insufficient bandwidth because the card speed is 1 gig. And finish. And now FT is in process. Now it's process of turning on FT. It will turn on FT. It will copy the VMDK and configuration files from iSCSI data store 1 to iSCSI data store 2 and provision a secondary VM. All of this will take a while, and what I will do, I will pause this video and I will come back when it's done. Okay, one more thing I want to show you real quick. You can see turn on fault tolerance is completed, but you see here the machine has an exclamation mark. The reason is because FT is enabled for this, but right now it's spinning up a secondary VM, and that secondary VM will be on ESXi3. Okay. It's using X. Okay, let me just refresh it for you. You might be able to see this here. Yeah, see, start fault tolerance secondary VM 55%. It's not completed yet, that's why it's warning, and fault tolerance status is not protected. It's starting. So once it's done, I will come back again and let me pause it for a while. Okay, it's completed. And as you can see, server 2 icon is changed, as well as here fault tolerance status is protected. Secondary VM is running on ESXi3. Server 2 itself is running on ESXi1, as I said earlier. And secondary VM, which is a read-only VM, it's on ESXi3. Those people who are new to FT, they might say, oh, where is the secondary VM? Well, you won't see it here. If you want to see it, you go to ESXi3, virtual machines, and here, secondary. If I open the console of server 2, okay, this is the one. And if I try to open the console of secondary, it usually shows here that it's a read only. We just let it open. Oh, okay. Just no worries. Disconnected. Okay, I'll just show you here quick. Administrator, our good old Windows client. Okay, okay, okay. Come on. See the icon? And go to server 3. Sorry, virtual machines. Secondary. If I say open console, see the console of this secondary virtual machine is read only because it's a shadow machine. Similar things, it's exactly the same, but the idea is the machine is running and we cannot interact with that. If somebody's thinking, wow, now there are two VMs, I can make you maybe do the load balancing or that sort of stuff. No, we cannot interact with secondary VM. It's a read-only instance. It's just, it will be activated only when there is a problem with primary. When there is a problem with primary, if the primary is down, secondary will become primary. And then FT will spin up a new secondary. That's how it works. Speaking of uh, how it works, remember before the data is stored, yeah, in DS2 we have folder for server 2. In DS1 we have folder for server 2, and now in DS2 also we have server 2, because what it did, it copied the VMDK files and configuration files here. And speaking of files, remember when we were talking about HA, we were talking about data store heartbeat, and see, this is the folder where they keep all this data store heartbeat files, and they just keep changing them. So, you know, like accessing them, that's how they know that the host is alive. Just because I was just browsing it, so it just came in my mind. That's why I'm just mentioning it again. So as you can see, server 2 folder with VMDK also on data store 2, and browse and server 2 folder with VMDK also data store 1. Okay. If we can want to test, we can also test that And how to do that, I'll just show you in a minute. Okay, now let's test what are options available for FT. If I right click server 2, we have options turn off, of course, and suspend. And as I said, you can use a storage vMotion only once you turn off the fault tolerance. Migrate secondary if I want to vMotion secondary VM or shadow VM to another ESXi host. Test restart secondary, it will test the restart of a secondary VM, and test failover. This is the one, this is an interesting one. So before performing this test, let's just re-verify things. We have a server 2, which is a primary VM. It's running on ESXi 1, correct? And secondary for this server 2 is running on ESXi 3, and we have seen that here. So if I right click server 2 and go to fault tolerance and say test failover, now it's testing the failover. And if I refresh this, what happened? See, the secondary instance now became primary. And why there is an exclamation mark? Because now there is no more secondary and it is spinning up the primary. So spinning up the secondary. So if I go to server 2, you see now server 2, this one is on ESXi 3 because this instance was secondary and it was running on ESXi 3. Now it became primary because we simulate a failure of a primary which was on ESXi 1. So now the secondary instance which was on ESXi 3 became primary. And for this primary, which was secondary before, now vSphere is spinning another secondary, and that will be on ESXi 2. So if I go to ESXi 2, you see server 2 secondary. Awesome, isn't it? So that's how it works. It's very nice feature, but again limited. You can protect VM up to 4 virtual CPUs only if you have Enterprise Plus license. If you have Standard or Enterprise license, you can protect VM with up to 2 virtual CPUs. So this is the scenario here, and as you can see, that all works well. And I will suggest to, if you're interested to dig deep into FT, this you can read more about it, and it's a good feature to protect VMs, in small size. It won't, in production time, in order to spin up a secondary, it won't take this long but here, as you know, I have limited resources, so it takes a while. But failover did not took a while even here in test environment. You can see the secondary instance automatic in a matter of a second became the primary one. And now for this primary, which was secondary, it is spinning up another secondary. So it will, to make sure it's always protected. So that's how FT works, gentlemen. And this is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please do subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much.